Each and every offseason, new contracts are drawn up throughout free agency, and while it creates tons of excitement for NHL fans, myself included, there's always those few that seem to age like milk. In this video, we're going to go over several contracts and rank them until we get to the worst one league-wide. We'll go over things such as stats, contract length, value, and clauses. But before we do, I'd quickly like to give a shout out to my amazing patrons who have been supporting me throughout my YouTube efforts. If you'd like to receive monthly shoutouts, content in advance, and without ads, and more, simply click the link below to join my Patreon. You can also join for free if you'd like to receive some occasional behind the scenes content as well. And with that, here are the top 10 worst NHL contracts of the 2024-25 season. When Brendan Gallagher initially agreed to terms with his longtime team in 2020, the forward had proven himself to be a household name in Quebec. Feisty and fearless on the forecheck, Gallagher is the type of player that doesn't play to his size at all. For years, the forward made his living net front and seemed to be almost eager to take the abuse that naturally comes with it. Up to this point in his career, Gallagher had just come off of back-to-back seasons in which he recorded 50 or 2 more points. In the 2018-19 campaign, the forward finished 5th on the Canadiens roster in hits and points impressively. So you can understand as to why Gally was viewed as a core member of the Habs lineup. Former GM Marc Bergevin definitely believed this when he gave his player a deal that would pay him $6.5 million for the next 6 years. But despite what he'd like to believe, Gallagher's body wasn't able to sustain the grueling style of play that he's put himself through years on end and began breaking down. If you look at his injury log, for example, there are 9 injuries listed that aren't illness related that have happened within the last 5 years alone. Taking this into consideration, it really sheds some light on why his stats have declined over the years. However, it's important to note that he did have somewhat of a redemption arc last campaign, as the forward managed to notch 31 points, with 16 of those being goals in 77 games played. Despite this though, he didn't even scratch the surface when it comes to actually playing to match his contract's value. And icing on the cake here, just like many others on this list, is the fact that Gallagher's contract has a full no move clause in effect until it expires in 2027. By then he'll be 35 years old. The curious case of Pierre-Luc Dubois, as it's not every day that a player just decides to quit playing hockey without technically quitting. And while I'm not trying to bash the guy, his lack of production is kind of why he's here to begin with. It's not one of those situations either where you can really sympathize, like Gallagher's situation for instance. He played hard and now he suffers the consequences. However, Dubois, who's now recorded 60 or more points on 3 different occasions, clearly can contribute if he feels like it. So we do know that he has it in him. After having a disaster of a debut campaign for the Kings with only 40 points to show for it, Dubois was traded yet again. This time, he'll be able to turn another page and begin a new chapter in the nation's capital. While obviously $8.5 million is a huge overpayment for what Dubois has been producing, there's a couple of things that allow for his contract not to be ranked super high. One being his age. At only 26 years old, Dubois is still in his prime physically, meaning that it's highly possible that he could turn things around. Maybe playing with Alex Ovechkin and company gets him going again. It's not completely out of the question. Another is that in 2028, the full no move clause on his deal changes to a modified, meaning that he could potentially be traded at that point in time. For now, all we can do is anticipate how he'll gel in Washington's locker room and within their top 6 this upcoming season. Alright guys, the NHL season is upon us, and you know what that means. It's time to stock up on all of your favorite team's merch, and that's where Fanatics comes in, since they're the ones producing NHL jerseys for the time being. If you're planning to buy one or other Fanatics products, you can support me simply by using my link. Once the Fanatics site appears, you can make your purchase just like you would originally. My link will be down in the description for those who are interested in supporting me. And now, back to the video. Back in the offseason of 2021, Sean Couturier, as a player, was at the peak of his career. At that point in time, Couturier had recently taken home the Selke Trophy after an insanely impressive display of two-way game. Not only that, but the forward had proven himself to be fully capable in being among the team's top offensive contributors. For example, by recording 76 points for back-to-back seasons, Couturier finished within the top 3 on the roster in points. This allowed for Philly to have the peace of mind when it came to giving him a long-term contract with a decent salary, as Couturier was given an 8-year, $62 million deal that carries with it a full no-move clause until the last year of the contract. Unfortunately, though, the plan began to veer off course once the 2021-22 campaign was well underway. Back issues began to take their toll on the forward's career, and after a failed non-invasive surgery, Couturier went back for the real deal in October of 2022. After being sidelined for a season, the captain made a return to play at the start of last campaign. For Couturier, however, there were curveballs thrown his way. This past March, for instance, he became the first NHL captain to be a healthy scratch in a decade, as he was made to sit out for 2 games. Not only that, but he was also dealing with a slew of ailments, according to GM Danny Briere. He was really banged up. I think at one point he had 5 different injuries that he was dealing with, and he was still playing, he says. While Couturier has been a fully capable top-line center in the past, it's clear that his body can no longer withstand the toll that the game has been taking on it. Despite everything being out of his control, it still makes his contract a sheer overpayment. A couple markers of offensive decline are his measly 38 points he notched in 74 games played last season, and also the fact that his shooting percentage was the lowest it had been, at 5.7%. in nearly a decade. When his contract finally expires in 2030, he'll be 37 years old. When Seth Jones was initially traded to Chicago, things in the Windy City were strikingly different, as the team, led by Stan Bowman at the time, had on its roster names such as Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, and Alex DeBrincat. In what seemed like a deal made under pressure, Bowman, who was under intense scrutiny at the time for the Kyle Beach incident, decided to make a massive gamble, and after trading away Adam Boqvist, a first-round pick and more, Bowman snagged the 6'4" defenseman. Anyways, pretty much from day one, Jones was looked at in the same way as he was once during his Columbus days. He was viewed as the #1 guy on the back end and the go-to on the power play. However, his style of game, paired with a much weaker defensive system in Chi-Town, didn't exactly translate in the same way. To make matters worse, by the time the team began falling apart at the seams, Jones was already signed to a monster deal that would be, on average, paying $9.5 million until 2030. Even though he did notch 51 points throughout his debut campaign as a Hawk, 19 of those points were generated on the power play alone. And as I mentioned before, once the roster began to be stripped of talent for rebuilding purposes, Jones really began to struggle. The past 2 seasons, for example, the defenseman hasn't even reached the 40-point threshold. This isn't to say that Jones can't eat minutes, play physical, or block shots. It's more about the fact that he's literally going to be the 3rd highest paid D-man by salary alone this season, and that he hasn't been close to Norris conversation for quite some time. Aside from the fact that he's being severely overpaid, knowing that his contract has a full no-move clause until its expiration makes it even more atrocious. There's definitely several reasons why Jarmo Kekalainen is no longer the GM of the Jackets, and taking on this deal was one of them for sure. Damon Severson, whose contract was initially signed in New Jersey, was acquired by Columbus for a 3rd-round pick. And that one is flat out hard to understand to me. Like, shouldn't that pick have went the other way? Regardless, Severson is set to remain in Columbus until 2031, while making an average of $6.25 million. According to The Athletic, the defenseman, after recording 28 points in 67 games played last season, is worth about $3.9 million. Taking that into account and the fact that he's probably going to decline more in his 30s. CBJ is going to be losing out on quite a bit of money. Severson, who will be 36 when his contract expires, has a full no move clause for the first half of his contract in effect, meaning that even if Severson somehow raises his value, Columbus won't be able to move on from him until 2027. Just like most of the contracts on this list, when Colton Parayko initially signed his current contract, it wasn't such a bad thing. The defenseman was a key piece that helped the Blues secure their first championship in franchise history. Not only that, but also the fact that he had proven to be effective at both ends of the ice at that point. The 2019-2020 season was one in which he scored 10 goals and put up 28 points throughout his 64 games played. So for a guy that's going to do that, help with the PK, and become one of your reliable core players, $6.5 million doesn't sound like such a bad number. This was in his contract year, and so it appears to have been a fluke season, as Parayko has never been able to come close to the .44 points per game that he once reached. After that one-off season, Parayko, following 273 games played, has only mustered up 100 points to show for it. While again, he's come in clutch in shutout role for his team, his value is only $2.5 million based on overall production. That's essentially a $4 million overpayment. And unless he's bought out or waives his no-move clause, his contract will continue to pay out $6.5 million a year until 2030. Since it wasn't all that long ago, many of us can remember last playoffs. How Nurse's play and, more importantly, his contract and result were brought into question. Back in 2021, however, things appeared quite different for the defenseman. For one, he was playing a bigger role in the back end and was playing an average of 25 minutes per game. At the time, names such as Evan Bouchard and Mattias Ekholm had yet to join the Oilers roster. So a bigger role equals a bigger paycheck. At least that's how GM at the time Ken Holland viewed things. As Nurse ended up cashing in big time and was given a monster of a contract, valued at $74 million for 8 years. But, as is usually the case, what initially seemed like a more reasonable salary ended up becoming a huge overpayment. Now, I'm definitely not saying that Nurse has never been worth $9.5 million a season, but he was once closer to that threshold. As I alluded to, Edmonton has become stronger defensively, and Nurse has had a hard time holding on to the top pairing position that he once had. Last season, for instance, he's played on average a few seconds shy of 22 minutes per game instead of the steady 25 that he had from 2020 to 2022. This definitely isn't me saying that Nurse doesn't bring talent to the table. He's durable, physical, and rarely is injured for long. He also can constantly contribute in a secondary scoring role. It just goes back to the fact that he's a second pairing defenseman that's getting paid like he's a first. Unfortunately for Edmonton, Nurse's contract doesn't expire until 2030 and carries with it a full no-move clause throughout. If you were able to watch my review that I did on the free agency signings, then you'll already have an idea of why Chandler Stephenson is here. Most watching can remember how hockey fans once believed that Jake Guentzel was only good because he played with Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh. Now, we definitely know that that's clearly not the case since he switched teams and still thrived. However, just like Guentzel before him, Stephenson has spent the last couple seasons playing with a highly skilled two-way center in Mark Stone. This helped elevate his game to unforeseen heights. So in theory, if he remained in Sin City, the $6.3 million salary may have been more reasonable. But now that he's no longer going to be playing with Jack Eichel and Stone, it's going to be more challenging for Stephenson to earn every dollar of his paycheck. The 30-year-old was able to record 51 points following 75 games played. If we consider his projected value throughout the entirety of his 7-year deal, then on average, he'll be able to earn about $2.3 million of what he's actually being paid. A couple more things that make this contract very questionable is the fact that his no-move clause will remain in effect until 2028, where he'll be 37 years old when he hits the UFA status. It seems like it wasn't all that long ago that Tom Wilson was terrorizing the league with his antics. From the fight night in NYC to his famous rivalry with Ryan Reeves, when the spotlight was on Wilson, he was truly doing his best work. If we backtrack a bit, he's proven to be a blocking and hitting machine up front, as he's had over 200 hits now for 8 seasons, and over 50 blocks for 5. Last season, for example, he logged 74 blocks, which is a pretty impressive feat. But as much as we'd like to believe that bringing those attributes to the ice will get a guy a fat paycheck in today's game, that's far from the case. And for Wilson, when it comes to the offensive side of it, he hasn't quite found that same magic that he had throughout the 2021-22 campaign. For the forward, his best season yet, points-wise, was one in which he hit the 50-point milestone for the first time. After notching 52 points in 78 games played, Wilson wasn't able to duplicate that same success again. Therefore, when GM Todd McClellan decided to extend Wilson, many were skeptical as to why he agreed to pay him $6.5 million a season. Sure, things have been different for the Caps with Nicklas Backstrom and Ovechkin taking a step back last season, but for 7 years? Currently, his projected value is looking more like $4.2 million, and according to analytics, Wilson is expected to be more like third-line material in a couple of years. While this is definitely a wait-and-see type of deal from the looks of it, Wilson's contract is an extremely huge gamble. I feel like this contract is just going to stay in the #1 spot for a long time. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder if Huberdeau and the Panthers would have come close to winning a cup last spring if the Tkachuk trade never happened. I vote not, but you never know. Anyways, when Calgary parted ways with Tkachuk, they believed that they were going to be receiving a player that would gel well in their lineup, one that would be able to thrive without the high caliber talent that he was so used to. Tkachuk and Johnny Gaudreau had already vacated Alberta when Huberdeau arrived on the scene, so in all fairness, having insane expectations for him just wasn't logical. But if he was able to notch maybe a point per game or even 75 points to start, that wouldn't have been so bad. Instead, while being paid a ridiculous $10.5 million a season, Huberdeau has only been able to produce less than 56 points since he became a Flame. So in essence, the forward is being paid like a franchise player that's playing more like a second liner. As it stands, for the remainder of Huberdeau's contract on average, he's set to have made $4.9 million a season of projected value. This means that he's only going to be able to truly make about half of what his deal demands, and the rest is an overpayment. Adding that fact to the mix along with his full no-move clause in effect until 2031, and you have, ladies and gentlemen, the worst contract currently in hockey. In conclusion, I'm going to try and circle back to this topic before the season ends, just because things always change when we get to see players in action for a bit. Again, if you enjoyed this video and aren't subscribed, I'd like to invite you to hit the subscribe button and like this video. It really helps the channel. And if you're already subscribed and have those notifications on, please consider joining my Patreon for constant updates and happenings. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.